1, 2, 3.
Good day, everyone. Our topic for today is about clausal modifiers. What comes into your mind when you hear the word clauses or clause? Do you have any idea what is it? Well, a clause, we can define it as a group of words with its own subject and verb. And there are two basic kinds of clauses. They are dependent and independent clause. The first type of clause is what we call independent clause. Look at this example. There is the mountain that we are going to climb. In this sentence, what is the independent clause? You are correct. There is the mountain is your independent clause, and that we are going to climb. What is the subject? The subject here is mountain, and the verb is. So if you take away that we are going to climb, there is the mountain can stand by itself. That's why it is called independent clause. Without the help of another clause that we are going to climb, we can still understand there is the mountain. How about this one? Another type of clause is what we call dependent clause. In this sentence, can you identify the dependent clause? Jennifer scrubbed the bathtub until her arms ache. Now, the dependent clause in here is until her arms ached. The subject here is arms and the verb is ached. But despite the fact it has a subject and a verb, it cannot stand by itself. And take note that there is a word, introductory word, at the beginning of this clause, which is a subordinating conjunction until. Despite the fact it has the subject arms and the verb ache, until her arms ache is still dependent to the main sentence, Jennifer scrubbed the bathtub. That's why it is called dependent clause. Now, subordinate clauses, or what we call dependent clauses, can function into three ways. So dependent clauses may act as a noun, as an adjective, or as an adverb. A subordinate clause, although it has subject and verb, cannot stand by itself as a complete sentence. It can only be a part of a sentence. To be understood, well, it is just a part of a sentence. Now, since we are talking about modifiers, out of three functions of subordinate clause, only adjective and adverb clause may be used as a modifier or describing words or describing clause. Now let's start first adjective clause. How would you know it is an adjective clause? Now let us focus first on adjective clause, or it can also be called adjectival clause. When we say adjective clause, it is a subordinate clause that modifies noun or pronoun. It answers the questions which one, what kind, or how many. Most often begins with relative pronouns and relative adverbs. So take note that dependent clauses or subordinate clauses may only be functioning as a subnoun, adjective, or adverb. So first, let's focus on the adjective clause. So as we all know, a modifier can also be in a form of a clause. Now, these are examples of relative pronouns. So how would you know it's an adjectival clause or adjective clause? Now, here's one of the techniques. You will know that it is an adjective clause because they are introduced by relative pronouns such as that, which, who, whom, whose, or relative adverbs such as when, how, why, and where. Let me give you more examples. Let's analyze these sentences. Can you tell me, can you highlight the adjective clause in each sentence? First sentence, the girl whom you teach is my sister. People whose cat shed need to vacuum often. This is the house that Jack built. For number 1, the adjective clause is whom you teach. Now take note, it is introduced by relative pronoun whom. And that clause describes the subject, girl, which is a noun. Therefore, that clause is an adjective. Number 2, whose cat's shed is your adjectival clause, modifying the subject, people, which is a noun. Therefore, it functions as an adjective clause, as I told you. And then number 3, that Jack built, modifying the predicate noun or predicate nominative house, which is a noun, of course. That Jack built is your adjectival clause. Can we do it again? Let's have some more examples. Now, can you point out the adjective clauses or the adjective clause in each sentence? Number 1, he picked up the ball that bounced across the kitchen floor. Sentence number 2, the book which I read last month isn't mine. The guy who winked at you is famous on campus. Number 4, my best friend, whom I needed the most when I failed the test, was not there to comfort me. Number 5, the group whose piece is written by a famous author won in the speech choir competition. Now, can you point out the adjective clause in each sentence? Let us answer. For number 1, we have that bounce across the kitchen floor, modifying the direct object ball, which is a noun. Therefore, as we all know, it's an adjectival clause. Which I read last month, modifying the subject book. Number 3, adjectival clause again because it modifies the noun, which is our subject, guy. And then we have here whom I needed the most, modifying best friend. And then we also have here whose piece is written by a famous author, modifying the subject group. So once again, these are your adjectival clause or adjective clause. Now here, pizza, which most people love, is not very healthy, modifying the subject, pizza. I know someone whose father served in World War II, modifying the direct object, someone. When there was no television, modifying days, which is our direct object once again. And then you have here fruit that is grown organically is expensive, and that adjective clause modifying the subject fruit. Again, adjectival clause or adjective clause modifies the subject. It could be direct object. It can also be indirect object, predicate noun, or object of the prepositions or any nouns or pronouns in a sentence. So, and one last thing, they are introduced by relative pronoun, or what we call the WH, or relative adverb. And of course, that under relative pronoun. Now, types of modifiers. I want you to compare the adjective to one-word adjective, or to clausal adjective or phrasal adjective. Now here, the borrowed book from class must be returned. As we all know, borrowed here is an adjective modifying the subject book. But the word borrowed can also be transposed or can be a phrase also. The books borrowed from class, this is already a group of words, more than a word, that's why it's called a phrase. As we all know, this is a participial phrase modifying the subject books. Even though it is made up of words already, still it is an adjective, but in a form of phrase. Or it can also be into a form of a clause. The books that were borrowed from class must be returned. That were borrowed from class, modifying still the subject. Now what I'm trying to say is, adjectives can be in a form of a word, single word modifier, can also be in a form of a phrase, or in a form of a clause, but still they function as one, or what we call an adjective, because it modifies these types of modifiers. Rather, they modify the subject book or books from the first sentence. Another example. The girl leading the parade is my best friend. Leading the parade is your adjective phrase, or to be specific, participial phrase. This is our subject, modifying girl, which is our subject, but it can also be in a form of a clause. The girl who is leading the parade is my best friend. Now for adjective clause, you have there the subject who is leading as your verb. Now take note that a clause is all comprised of a relative pronoun, a subject, and a verb. Another example, you have here, something smelling bad may be rotten. Smelling bad is also your participial phrase or adjective phrase modifying the subject something. And then we have adjective clause, something that smells bad may be rotten, modifying the subject something. But take note, class, or take note, smelling bad is still the same with that smells bad, but they are in a different form. Smelling bad is just a group of words, but that smells bad has a subject and a verb. That is your subject, smell is your verb. So you see, modifiers or adjectives can be in different forms, but still they function as an adjective. They may have different physical property, but they function as an adjective. So you can vary your modifiers.